The fog clung to the spires of St. Mary's Church like a shroud, muffling the midnight chimes that echoed through the sleepy village of Eldridge. Inside, the choir's voices rose in harmonious fervor, Reginald Hawthorne conducting with fervent precision, his baton slicing the air as they intoned the ancient hymn, "O Sacred Head Now Wounded." Suddenly, Hawthorne faltered, his hand clutching his throat. The chalice of sacramental wine slipped from his grasp, shattering on the stone floor. He collapsed amid the pews, foam flecking his lips, his eyes wide with unspoken accusation. Whispers rippled through the assembled singers. Was it divine retribution, or something far more earthly? The village awoke to murder most foul, and only one man could unravel the poisoned melody. Hercule Poirot. Chapter 1. The Midnight Summons. The fog draped itself over the village of Eldridge like a conspirator's cloak, muffling the midnight chimes of St. Mary's Church as they reverberated through the frost-kissed air. Inside the ancient stone edifice, where candlelight flickered against stained glass saints, the choir's voices swelled in a haunting rendition of "O Sacred Head Now Wounded." Reginald Hawthorne, the revered and iron-fisted choir master, stood at the conductor's stand, his silhouette sharp against the altar's golden glow. His baton sliced through the air with military precision, commanding the sopranos, tenors, and basses to weave their harmonies into a tapestry of divine reverence. The sacramental wine, poured into a silver chalice for the choir's ritual sip during the hymn's crescendo, gleamed under the flickering light. Suddenly, Hawthorne's baton wavered. His hand flew to his throat, his eyes widening in a silent scream. The chalice slipped from his grasp, shattering on the flagstone floor, its crimson contents pooling like blood. Foam flecked his lips as he crumpled amid the pews, his final breath a discordant gasp. Whispers of shock rippled through the singers. Divine wrath, or a darker, more earthly hand? The village of Eldridge awoke to a murder such a challenge. By dawn, Poirot was aboard a rattling train, the 1930s English countryside unfurling beyond the window like a sepia-toned painting. Rolling hills, dusted with early frost, gave way to clusters of thatched cottages, their chimneys puffing smoke into the gray sky. The spire of St. Mary's pierced the horizon, a sentinel over the village of Eldridge, its presence both comforting and ominous. At the station, Inspector Japp awaited, his overcoat flapping in the wind, his face etched with the weariness of a man grappling with the inexplicable. "Poirot, old chap," he greeted, his voice gruff. "It's a rum business, this. Reginald Hawthorne, choirmaster, keeled over mid-rehearsal last night. Autopsy's in. Cyanide, quick and nasty. Found in the sacramental wine. No one saw a thing, or so they claim." They climbed into a police motor car, the engine sputtering as they wound through Eldridge's narrow lanes. The village was a postcard of English tranquility, cobblestone paths, ivy-clad cottages, and a market square where locals whispered of the scandal. Hawthorne was a big fish here, Japp continued, navigating a turn. Built the choir into something grand, drew crowds from miles away. But he had enemies. Stepped on toes, you know. His wife, Eleanor, inherits everything. House, savings, the lot. Motive there, perhaps? Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming. "And the others, Inspector? The choir. Surely they are not all angels." Japp chuckled grimly. "Far from it." Victor Langford, the tenor, was green with envy, wanted Hawthorne's favor for lead roles. Lydia Sinclair, the soprano, had some sort of history with him, though she's cagey about it. Reverend Blackwood, the vicar, was close to Hawthorne, but there's talk of missing church funds. And Dr. Edmund Crowe, the local physician who pronounced him dead, well, he's got a past he'd rather keep buried. They arrived at St. Mary's, its ancient oak doors creaking as they, his clerical collar askew, his fingers twisting a rosary with anxious fervor. And Dr. Edmund Crowe, his physician's composure betrayed by a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. "Madame, messieurs," Poirot began, his voice precise yet melodious. "The method of this crime is clear. Cyanide in the sacramental wine, administered during the sacred hymn. But the motive, that is the symphony we must decode. Tell me, who had access to the chalice?" A murmur rippled through the group. Reverend Blackwood cleared his throat. "I prepared the wine, as always, for the ritual sip, but the decanter was in the sacristy all evening. Anyone could have tampered with it." Lydia's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Reginald always sipped first, to bless the hymn. It was his tradition." Victor Langford's eyes flashed. A tradition that made him a target, clearly. But why look at us? The village is full of gossips. Some say the church is haunted, cursed even. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ghosts, Monsieur Langford? The little gray cells do not believe in specters, but in human passions, jealousy, greed, vengeance. Oh, those are real." He approached the altar where the shattered chalice lay, its shards glinting like accusations. Kneeling, he examined the scene, his gloved fingers brushing the stone floor. A crumpled piece of paper caught his eye, tucked beneath a hymn book in Hawthorne's satchel. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a scrawled note in jagged ink. "Your time ends with the final note." The words hung in the air like an unresolved chord, their threat as palpable as the chill in the church. "Who wrote this?" Poirot asked, holding the note aloft. The choir members exchanged glances, their silence louder than any confession. Eleanor's handkerchief trembled in her grip. Victor's fists clenched. Lydia's breath hitched. Blackwood's rosary beads clicked faster, and Crowe's eyes narrowed. Jap leaned in, whispering, "Looks like Langford's handwriting to me, Poirot. Tyrant. Always favoring Lydia for solos, never giving me a chance." Lydia flushed, her hands twisting in her lap. "He said I had promise. I didn't ask for favoritism." Blackwood interjected. "I was in the sacristy until the hymn began, then joined the choir. I saw nothing unusual." Crowe nodded. "I arrived late, after the rehearsal started. I was in my clinic until 9:30. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, the poison was administered precisely during the hymn's climax. A moment of distraction, of passion. Someone knew the exact moment Hawthorne would sip." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I shall need to examine this sacristy, this decanter, and the lives of each of you. For now, remain in Eldridge. The little gray cells, they are only beginning." As the group dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous church, Poirot lingered by the altar. The note's words replayed in his mind. "Your time ends with the final note." A threat, yes, but also a clue, a signature of intent. He glanced at the organ, its pipes looming like silent sentinels. A faint draft stirred the air, carrying a whisper, not of ghosts, but of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Outside, the fog thickened, and Poirot knew the melody of murder had only begun its first refrain. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Vestry. The vestry of St. Mary's Church was a cloister of secrets, its oak-paneled walls absorbing the whispered anxieties of the choir members gathered within. The air was thick with the scent of old hymnals, candle wax, and the lingering tang of incense from the previous night's tragedy. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the somber chaos around him. His polished shoes clicked on the flagstone floor as he paced, each step measured, his gray eyes darting from face to face, cataloging every twitch, every averted gaze. Inspector Japp leaned against a bookcase, his arms crossed, his expression one of barely concealed ceaselessly. Dr. Edmund Crowe, the village physician, stood apart, his hand steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. Japp snorted, breaking the silence. Hardly a saint, Poirot. Hawthorne was a big name in Eldridge, turned this choir into a regional marvel, drew crowds from London even. But he had a knack for making enemies, stepped on toes, pushed people around. His wife Eleanor gets the lot now. House, savings, everything. That's motive, plain as day. Eleanor's head snapped up, her dark eyes flashing. I loved Reginald, she protested, her voice trembling like a plucked string. Our marriage had its difficulties, yes, but poison? I would never. Her words hung in the air, fragile yet defiant, and Poirot noted the slight tremor in her hands, the way her gaze darted to the others as if seeking allies. Or enemies. Poirot turned to Victor Langford, whose baritone voice now quavered with indignation. Monsieur Langford, he said, his tone deceptively mild. You vied for lead solos, oui? Did resentment brew in your heart when Hawthorne favored others? Langford flushed, his hands clenching into fists. We argued, I'll admit it. He kept giving solos to Lydia, said she had the divine spark. I worked just as hard, harder even. But murder? That's absurd. His voice cracked, and he turned to the window, as if the gray fog outside could shield him from scrutiny. Lydia Sinclair, her porcelain face half hidden by her curls, spoke softly, almost to herself. Reginald was kind to me. Perhaps too kind. Her eyes flicked to Eleanor, a fleeting glance that spoke of unspoken scandals, of tensions woven into the choir's harmonies. He saw potential in me, that's all. I never asked for special treatment. Reverend Blackwood cleared his throat, his rosary beads clicking like a metronome. The church funds, he said, his voice strained. Reginald audited them recently. He found discrepancies, minor ones, I assure you. We resolved it amicably, but he was insistent on transparency. His words were the decanter of sacramental wine rested on a wooden table. Poirot's gloved fingers brushed the decanter's surface, noting a faint smudge, a fingerprint perhaps, left in haste. Ah, he murmured, his eyes gleaming. The plot thickens. He turned to Japp. This decanter, Inspector. Who handled it last? Japp shrugged. Blackwood says he filled it before the rehearsal, but it was left unattended for hours. Anyone could have slipped in. Poirot's gaze returned to the group, his voice sharp now. And the cyanide? Where does one procure such a poison in a village like Eldridge? Not in the grocer's shop, I think. He noted Crowe's slight flinch, Eleanor's tightened grip on her handkerchief, Langford's averted eyes. Lydia's breath hitched and Blackwood's beads paused mid-click. The room was a symphony of tension, each note a clue to the murderer's identity. Outside, the village whispered of darker forces. Old Mrs. Thatcher, the baker's widow, had cornered Jap at the station, muttering about ghostly moans heard in the church during late rehearsals. "The spirits are angry," she'd said, her eyes wide with superstition. "Hawthorne disturbed something sacred." Poirot dismissed such tales. His little gray cells dealt in facts, not phantasms. But the rumors suggested a deliberate attempt to sow fear. A red herring, perhaps, to distract from human malice. He questioned each suspect further, his voice a scalpel cutting through their defenses. "Madame Hawthorne," he said, turning to Eleanor. "Your husband's success brought wealth, oui, but also strain. Were there private discordances?" Eleanor's lips tightened. "Reginald was a difficult man. The war changed him, made him cold, controlling. But I endured for the sake of the choir, the village. I had no reason to harm him." Her voice cracked, and Poirot noted the faint bruise on her wrist, half hidden by her sleeve. A relic of a harsher hand. To Langford he said, "Your rivalry, monsieur, was it merely musical? Blackmail, perhaps?" As the questioning drew to a close, Poirot returned to the sacristy, his eyes scanning every detail. The decanter's smudge was indeed a fingerprint, but whose? He instructed Jap to have it analyzed, though he suspected it might be a deliberate misdirection. The note from Hawthorne's hymn book, "Your time ends with the final note," gnawed at him. Its theatricality suggested a mind both cunning and vengeful. He examined the hymn book itself, its pages worn from use, and found a faint ink stain on the margin of the poisoned hymn. A clue, or another distraction? The village clock struck noon, its chimes echoing through the church. Poirot gathered the group once more. "Mes amis," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "This crime is a performance, staged with precision. The poison was no accident, the note no mere threat. Someone among you orchestrated this finale. But fear not. The little gray cells of Hercule Poirot will uncover the composer." As the suspects dispersed, their footsteps heavy with dread, Poirot lingered in the vestry. The fog outside had thickened, curling against the stained glass windows like a living thing. A faint sound caught his ear, a creak, a whisper, not from ghosts but from the church itself. He followed it to the organ loft, where a single hymn sheet lay discarded, its edges torn. Scrawled in the margin, in a hand that matched the threatening note, was a single word. Betrayed. The discovery sent a shiver through him, not of fear but of anticipation. The melody of murder was growing louder, and the next note would shatter someone's carefully crafted facade. Chapter 3. The Jealous Melody. The morning mist clung to Eldridge like a jealous lover, its tendrils curling around the ancient stones of St. Mary's Church, where the echoes of last night's tragedy still lingered. Hercule Poirot stood in the vestry, his small frame dwarfed by the towering shelves of hymnals, his gray eyes gleaming with the intensity of a conductor before a symphony. The fingerprint buzzed with whispers of Langford's jealousy, but Poirot's little gray cells demanded more than gossip. Jap led him to the rectory, a squat stone building beside the church, where Victor Langford sat at a worn oak table, his blonde hair disheveled, his hands clasped tightly to still their trembling. The room smelled of damp wool and old tea, the air heavy with accusation. "Monsieur Langford," Poirot began, his voice soft but piercing, "your rivalry with Reginald Hawthorne is well known. You composed hymns, oui? hymns he claimed as his own. Jealousy is a potent poison, is it not? Langford's eyes flashed, his baritone voice rough with indignation. Yes, we clashed. He stole my compositions, passed them off as his genius, called me a mediocre talent in front of the choir. But murder? I'd rather outshine him in song than see him dead. His fists clenched, and Poirot noted the passion in his words. Genuine or a performance? Tell me, Poirot pressed, where were you when the chalice was filled? Who saw you? Langford hesitated, his gaze flickering to the window. I was in the sacristy early, setting out the wine as part of my duties. But I left before the rehearsal began. Ask Lydia. She saw me in the nave practicing scales. Poirot nodded, filing the alibi for verification. He dismissed Langford, instructing Japp to keep him close, and turned his attention to the village itself. Eldridge was a tapestry of secrets, its cobblestone lanes and ivy-clad cottages hiding tensions beneath their quaint facade. At the market square, locals whispered of the church's ghosts, strange moans heard during late rehearsals, attributed to divine displeasure. Poirot dismissed such superstitions, but the rumors suggested a deliberate distraction, perhaps to mask the murderer's movements. He made his way to Eleanor Hawthorne's cottage, a modest dwelling with roses climbing its walls, their petals drooping under the weight of the fog. Eleanor greeted him at the door, her pale face composed, but her eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. She wore a black mourning. Him. I loved him, in my way. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind remained sharp. And this bruise, madame, a relic of his temper? She flinched, pulling her sleeve down. An accident. He didn't mean it. Her words were a shield, but Poirot saw the cracks. Fear, shame, perhaps vengeance. He excused himself to search the cottage, his gloved hands moving with precision. In the garden shed, among rusted tools and sacks of soil, he found a small glass vial, its label faded but legible. Prussic acid. Cyanide's precursor. He held it up to the light, its contents long gone, but its implications heavy. Returning to Eleanor, he presented the vial. Madame, explain this. Her face drained of color. That's not mine. Someone must have placed it there to frame me. Her voice rose, a note of panic breaking through her composure. Poirot noted a reaction. Genuine shock? Or a masterful act? Leaving the cottage, he returned to St. Mary's, where the organ's pipes loomed like silent judges. The church was empty now, save for the faint creak of settling wood. Poirot climbed to the organ loft, his eyes scanning for further clues. There, tucked behind a stack of hymn sheets, he found a torn cufflink, its silver surface engraved with the initials T.B., Reverend Thomas Blackwood. The discovery sent a thrill through him, not of surprise but of confirmation. The web of deceit was tightening, and the Reverend's pious facade was beginning to fray. Poirot sought out Blackwood in the vicarage, a stone's throw from the church. The Reverend was in his study, surrounded by theological tomes and a half-empty bottle of sherry. His rosary beads clicked nervously as Poirot entered, holding the cufflink aloft. Reverend Blackwood, explain this, s'il vous plaît. Found in the organ loft where you claim not to have been. Blackwood's face paled, his fingers freezing mid-bead. I was there that night, praying late, he stammered. Reginald confronted me about the church funds, donations I borrowed for my sister's medical bills. He threatened to expose me, but I left before tightened. He knew of a past mistake, a surgery that went wrong years ago. He used it to demand free medical care for the choir, for his wife. Blackmail, plain and simple. But I didn't kill him. Poirot noted the tremor in Crow's hands, the defensive edge in his voice. "And cyanide, doctor. Available in your clinic, perhaps?" Crow nodded reluctantly. "It's used in small doses for chemical analysis, but my supplies are locked, and I noticed nothing missing." As evening fell, the fog thickened, wrapping Eldridge in a shroud of mystery. Poirot returned to the church, drawn by the whispers of ghosts that had stirred the village. Standing in the nave, he listened, his ears attuned to the faintest sounds. A low moan echoed from the organ pipes, not supernatural but mechanical. A deliberate tampering, perhaps? He climbed to the loft again, his flashlight piercing the shadows. There, wedged in a pipe, was a small device, a crude whistle, designed to mimic ghostly wails when air passed through. A clever distraction. But whose? Back in the vestry, Poirot gathered the suspects, their faces pale under the candlelight. "Mes amis," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "This crime is a composition of deceit. The fingerprint implicates Langford, yet it feels staged. The vial points to Madame Hawthorne, but is it too convenient? The cufflink accuses the Reverend, but alibis muddy the truth. And these ghosts, a trick to sow fear." He held up the whistle, watching their reactions. Eleanor gasped. Langford's eyes widened. Lydia clutched her shawl. Blackwood's beads stilled, and Crow's face remained impassive. As they dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind racing. The whistle suggested a mind both theatrical and desperate, someone who knew the village's superstitions and exploited them. But the true clue lay in the timing, the poison delivered during the hymn's crescendo, when all eyes were on Hawthorne, all ears on the music. Only someone intimate with the choir's rituals could have orchestrated such a moment. And then, bearing the word vengeance weighed heavily in Poirot's pocket, its jagged script echoing the threatening note from Reginald Hawthorne's hymn book. The little gray cells buzzed with connections, but the melody of truth remained elusive. Poirot's voice cut through the confessional's gloom, precise and probing. "Reverend Blackwood, explain this cufflink, found where you claim not to have been. And the word vengeance, does it speak to your heart?" Blackwood's face, visible through the lattice, was ashen, his rosary beads clicking like a metronome of guilt. I was in the organ loft that night, praying late," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Reginald confronted me about the church funds, donations I borrowed for my sister's medical care. He threatened to expose me, to ruin my name. But I swear, I left before the rehearsal ended. Ask Dr. Crow. He treated my sister that evening. He can confirm I was at his clinic." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind cataloging the Reverend's words. "And this borrowing, Reverend, was it repaid, or did Hawthorne hold it over you like a sword?" Blackwood's shoulders sagged, his clerical collar seeming to choke him. "I repaid most of it, in secret. But Reginald was relentless, always watching, always judging. He saw sin in every shadow." His voice held a bitter edge, and Poirot noted it. A motive rooted in fear, perhaps desperation. Leaving the confessional, Poirot sought Dr. Edmund Crow at his clinic, a sterile room on the village's edge, its shelves lined with bottles and instruments gleaming under lamplight. Crow was cleaning a stethoscope, his movements precise but his eyes wary as Poirot entered. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his tone guarded, "I trust you're unraveling this tangle?" "Unraveling, oui," Poirot replied, his accent curling around the words. "The Reverend claims you can confirm his alibi. And yet, I wonder, did Hawthorne hold secrets over you as well? Crow's jaw tightened, his hands pausing mid-motion. In the church's nave, practicing scales, her auburn curls catching the candlelight. Her face was pale, her hands twisting in her shawl as she met his gaze. Mademoiselle Sinclair, Poirot said gently, your affections for Hawthorne, were they unrequited, or did they stir the widow's jealousy? Lydia blushed, her voice soft as a hymn. Reginald was kind, encouraging. He promised me lead roles, said I had a gift. But it was never more than that. Eleanor suspected an affair, but it was false, purely her imagination. Her eyes darted to the altar where the shattered chalice still lay, cordoned off by Japp's constables. Poirot noted her nervousness, the way her fingers clutched the shawl. A shield against accusation? As he questioned her, a discovery in Hawthorne's study shifted the investigation. Tucked in a locked drawer, Poirot found a love letter, written in a delicate hand that mimicked Lydia's. My heart sings for you alone, Reginald. The signature was hers, but the ink was fresh, the paper uncreased, forged perhaps to cast suspicion. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, holding up the letter. This is your hand, oui? Lydia gasped, her eyes wide with shock. No, I never wrote that. Someone's trying to frame me. Her voice broke, and Poirot believed her. The panic was too raw, too uncalculated. But who had planted the letter? Eleanor to fuel her jealousy? Langford to deflect his own guilt? Or another working in the shadows? Poirot returned to the church, drawn by the whispers of ghosts that had gripped the village. Old Mrs. Thatcher's tales of moans in the night had spread, sowing fear among the superstitious. Standing in the nave, he listened, his ears attuned to the faintest sounds. A low wail echoed from the organ pipes, not supernatural but deliberate. A mechanical trick, as he'd suspected, Poirot said. Climbing to the loft, he found the whistle device again, its crude design meant to mimic ghostly cries. But a new clue emerged, a smudged reveal. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Tell me, Madame Hawthorne, did you ever visit the organ loft? Eleanor's eyes widened. Never. I stayed in the pews watching the rehearsal. Reginald insisted I be there to show unity. Her voice faltered, and Poirot noted the bruise on her wrist again, a silent testament to her husband's cruelty. And you, Monsieur Langford? Poirot turned to the tenor. You were in the sacristy early, oui? Did you see anyone tampering with the wine? Langford shook his head vehemently. I set out the decanter, then left. I was practicing in the nave. Lydia can confirm it. Lydia nodded, her voice barely audible. He was there, singing scales. Blackwood interjected, his voice strained. I was in the sacristy until the hymn began, then joined the choir. I saw nothing unusual. Crow added, I arrived late, after the rehearsal started. My clinic records will show I was there until 9:30. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, the poison was delivered with precision during the hymn's climax, a moment of distraction, of passion. Someone knew the exact moment Hawthorne would sip. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. I shall need to examine your lives further, your secrets, your sins. As the group dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous church, a scream pierced the night. Poirot rushed outside, Jap at his heels, to find a local boy, Tommy Weaver, caught tampering with the organ pipes. The lad, barely 16, was trembling, his cap clutched in his hands. "I was paid to do it," he blurted. "Slipped a shilling to make them pipes wail. Make it sound haunted." "Paid by whom?" Poirot demanded. Tommy shook his head. "Dunno. A note under my door with the coin. Said to keep quiet." Poirot exchanged a glance with Jap. Another red herring, orchestrated to deepen the village's fear. But the note's lavender scent, faint but unmistakable, matched Ellen. Chapter 5. The False Note. The village of Eldridge lay under a shroud of fog, its cobblestone lanes silent save for the distant toll of St. Mary's church bells, their mournful clang echoing the unresolved murder of Reginald Hawthorne. Hercule Poirot stood in the nave, the flickering candlelight casting his shadow across the pews, his gray eyes sharp as he pondered the latest clue. A local boy, Tommy Weaver, caught tampering with the organ pipes to mimic ghostly wails. The lad's confession, a shilling and a note to create a spectral diversion, pointed to a cunning mind orchestrating fear to mask murder. The note's lavender scent, faint but distinct, mirrored Eleanor Hawthorne's perfume, yet Poirot's little gray cells cautioned against hasty conclusions. Was it a deliberate frame, or a careless slip by the widow herself? Inspector Jap, his overcoat damp from the fog, paced beside Poirot, his frustration palpable. "This boy's stunt has the village in a tizzy, Poirot. Ghosts. And that lavender scent. Eleanor's got some explaining to do." Poirot raised a manicured finger, his Belgian accent precise. "Patience, mon ami. The scent is a clue, oui. But clues can be planted like seeds to mislead. We must dig deeper." He turned toward the vestry, where the choir members awaited, their faces a tapestry of dread and suspicion. The fingerprint on the decanter, Victor Langford's. The cufflink in the organ loft, Reverend Blackwood's. The forged love letter, mimicking Lydia Sinclair's hand. The vial of prussic acid in Eleanor's shed, all threads in a web of deceit. But the lavender-scented note suggested a new layer, one Poirot was determined to unravel. He sought Eleanor first, finding her in her cottage, where the air was heavy with the scent of roses and grief. She sat by the fire, her mourning dress stark against her pale skin, her hands clutching a lace handkerchief. The bruise on her wrist, though fading, was still visible, a silent testament to her late husband's cruelty. "Madame Hawthorne," Poirot began, his tone gentle, "claimed to be. The wine was poured here," he said, pointing to the sacristy table. "The chalice filled there, by the altar. Only 5 had access. Madame Hawthorne, Monsieur Langford, Mademoiselle Sinclair, Reverend Blackwood, and Dr. Crow. Let us reenact the hymn's crescendo." As the choir mimed their positions, accusations flew like discordant notes. Langford pointed at Lydia. "You were always hovering near Reginald, fawning over his praise," Lydia retorted, her voice sharp. "And you were bitter, Victor, always scheming to take his place," Crow interjected. "Enough! The Reverend prepared the wine. Why not look at him?" Blackwood's rosary beads clicked furiously. "I served the church, not poison." Eleanor remained silent, her eyes darting between them, and Poirot observed her closely. The reconstruction revealed little new, but the tension exposed raw nerves. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered in the sacristy, his eyes scanning for overlooked details. There, in a corner, he found a smudged hymn book, its pages marked with faint pencil scratches, hasty calculations, perhaps, of doses or timing. The handwriting matched none of the suspect's known scripts, suggesting a hidden hand. Seeking further insight, Poirot visited Hawthorne's study, a cluttered room in the choir master's home filled with sheet music and ledgers. A locked drawer, forced open by Japp's men, revealed a ledger detailing church funds, pages marked with discrepancies, sums siphoned off, and signatures in Blackwood's name, but countersigned by Dr. Crow. A conspiracy, Poirot murmured, his mind racing. He confronted Blackwood in the vicarage, holding up the ledger. "Reverend, these figures suggest embezzlement, with the doctor's complicity. Did Hawthorne discover this?" Blackwood's face crumpled, his rosary falling silent. "I borrowed funds for my sister's care, yes, but I meant to repay them. Reginald found out, demanded silence, hush money, he called it. But poison, missing page as critical. Was it destroyed to hide evidence, or another plant to incriminate her?" As night fell, the fog thickened, muffling the village's sounds. Poirot returned to the church, drawn by the persistent whispers of ghosts. Standing in the nave, he listened, his ears attuned to the faintest disturbances. A creak from the organ loft drew him upward, where he found a hidden alcove behind the pipes, its dust disturbed by recent footsteps. There, wedged in a crack, was a torn page from Lydia's hymn book, marked with a cryptic note. "Meet at midnight. End the threat." The handwriting matched the threatening note from Hawthorne's satchel, but its ink was fresh, suggesting a recent forgery. Poirot gathered the suspects once more, their faces pale under the vestry's candlelight. "Mes amis," he declared, holding up the torn page. "This note suggests a meeting, a plan to silence Hawthorne. But is it genuine, or another false note in this deadly symphony?" He watched their reactions. Eleanor's hands tightened. Langford's jaw clenched. Lydia gasped. Blackwood's beads resumed their frantic clicking, and Crow's eyes narrowed. "Someone among you," Poirot continued, "knew Hawthorne's ritual sip during the hymn's crescendo. Someone with access to cyanide, to the sacristy, to secrets. This page, this note, it points to Mademoiselle Sinclair. Yet I suspect a deeper deception." Lydia wept, protesting her innocence, while Langford accused Blackwood, and Crow pointed to Eleanor. The room was a cacophony of blame, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere, tracing the lavender scent, the forged letter, the tampered pipes. As the meeting ended, a new clue emerged. A villager reported seeing a cloaked figure near the church the night of the murder, carrying a small vial. The description was vague, male or female, tall or short, but the vial matched the one in Eleanor's shed. Poirot instructed Japp to investigate, but his instincts screamed of another distraction. Church told with somber finality. Hercule Poirot stood in the church's hidden alcove, his flashlight illuminating a chilling find. An empty vial reeking of cyanide, and a scrap of lavender-stained cloth, both tucked behind a secret latch in the organ loft. The torn page from Lydia Sinclair's hymn book, discovered earlier, bore a cryptic message in jagged script. "Meet at midnight. End the threat." Its ink matched the threatening note found in Reginald Hawthorne's satchel. "Your time ends with the final note," suggesting a single hand weaving a tapestry of deception. Poirot's little gray cells hummed with anticipation, sensing the murderer's score was nearing its crescendo. Inspector Japp, his face etched with exhaustion, joined Poirot in the alcove, his lantern casting long shadows. "Blimey, Poirot, another vial? And that cloth. Smells like Eleanor's perfume again. She's in deep, isn't she?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, his Belgian accent sharp. "Non, mon ami. The lavender is too convenient. The note too theatrical. These are false notes designed to mislead. But this message..." He held up the torn page. "It is a cipher, a melody of motive. We must decode it." The words "meet at midnight" suggested a planned rendezvous. But with whom? And why frame Lydia? Poirot returned to the vestry, where the choir members awaited, their faces pale under the flickering candlelight. Lydia Sinclair, her auburn curls framing a tear-streaked face, clutched her shawl as Poirot presented the torn page. "Mademoiselle Sinclair," he said, his voice gentle yet probing. "This note, found in your hymn book, incriminates you. A meeting to end a threat. Hawthorne's blackmail, perhaps?" Lydia's eyes widened, her voice trembling. "I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I never wrote that. Someone tore that page, forged the note. Reginald wrote me notes sometimes about rehearsals, but this, it's not my hand." "But I wrote no such note." His voice cracked, and Poirot noted the fear in his eyes, guilt or dread of exposure. To test the cipher's origin, Poirot visited the vicarage, where Blackwood's study was a clutter of theological tomes and scattered papers. The ink bottle on the desk matched the note's hue, but the room was indeed accessible. Choir members often met here for planning. A search revealed a hidden ledger beneath a stack of hymnals, detailing more financial discrepancies, sums siphoned from church funds, with Hawthorne's initials approving some withdrawals. "A partnership turned sour?" Poirot mused, his gray cells tracing the threads of motive. Next he sought Victor Langford, found practicing in the church's nave, his baritone resonant but strained. "Monsieur Langford," Poirot said, "you composed hymns, oui? Did Hawthorne steal more than your music, perhaps your pride, your future?" Langford's eyes flashed. "He took everything, my solos, my compositions, my chance at recognition. But I'd rather best him in song than poison his wine." His passion was raw, but Poirot noted his steady hands, no tremor of guilt. Lydia was next, her voice soft as she rehearsed in the choir loft. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, "Hawthorne's notes to you, were they ever personal?" She blushed, her hands twisting. "He wrote of my talent, encouraged me, but nothing improper. Eleanor misunderstood, thought I was a threat." Her words rang true, but Poirot sensed a hidden fear, perhaps of the widow's wrath. Dr. Crow at his clinic was polishing instruments, his composure a thin mask. "Doctor," Poirot said, "the vial in the alcove, cyanide like your supplies. Stolen, you claim?" Crow nodded, his voice tight. "My stock is locked, but someone could have taken it during a visit. Hawthorne knew my past, a surgical error in London. He used it to control me." His bitterness was palpable, and Poirot filed it away, another motive, another thread. Eleanor's cottage was Poirot's final stop, where the widow sat by a dying fire, her mourning dress stark against her pale skin, remained elusive. Returning to the church, Poirot examined the alcove again, its secrets yielding slowly. The lavender-stained cloth was fine silk, like Eleanor's shawl, but its weave matched a scarf Lydia wore, a deliberate plant, or a careless mistake. The vial's glass was identical to those in Crow's clinic, but its cap bore a faint scratch, a mark of haste perhaps. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the forged note, the tampered pipes, the financial ledger. The murderer was orchestrating a performance, each clue a distraction from the true motive. As night deepened, the fog seemed to whisper, echoing the village's tales of ghosts. Poirot stood in the nave, listening. A faint sound, a voice not spectral but human, came from the organ pipes. Ventriloquism, perhaps, to fuel the ghost stories. He climbed to the loft, his flashlight revealing a hidden speaker, crudely wired to amplify whispers. Another trick, but whose? Gathering the suspects in the vestry, Poirot held up the speaker. Mes amis, this ghost is mechanical, like the whistle in the pipes. Someone seeks to frighten, to distract. But from what? Their reactions were telling. Eleanor's hands trembled. Langford's eyes darted. Lydia wept. Blackwood's beads resumed their frantic clicking, and Crow's face hardened. He pressed further, presenting the ledger. Reverend, these figures show Hawthorne's complicity in your embezzlement. Did he demand silence, or more? Blackwood's voice broke. He took a share, then threatened to expose me. But I didn't kill him. Crow interjected. He forced me to sign those ledgers to cover his tracks. I had no part in his death. Lydia whispered. He wrote me notes, but never like that cipher. Someone's framing me. Langford growled. You're all pointing fingers, but what about Eleanor? She hated him. Eleanor's eyes flashed, his flashlight tracing the faint outlines of footprints in the dust. Overlapping impressions, one set from dainty heels, another from sturdy boots. The delicate tracks matched Eleanor Hawthorne's shoes, the widow whose lavender scent haunted the clues. The heavier ones aligned with Reverend Thomas Blackwood's boots, the cleric whose cufflink and ledger had already cast suspicion. The hidden alcove's cache, a cyanide vial and lavender-stained cloth, had tightened the noose around them. Yet Poirot's little gray cells cautioned against premature judgment. The murderer's score was complex, each note a deliberate misdirection. Inspector Japp, his face ruddy from the damp chill, joined Poirot in the loft, his lantern casting jittery shadows. Blimey, Poirot. Footprints from both Eleanor and Blackwood. They're in it together, aren't they? That lavender cloth, the vial, it's all pointing to a plot. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his Belgian accent sharp yet measured. Mon ami, appearances are the siren's song of deception. These footprints, they overlap, oui, but do they sing in harmony? Or is one leading the other astray? We must test their duet. The ciphered note from Lydia's hymn book, meet at midnight, and the threat, still echoed in his mind, its jagged script a taunt. Was it a genuine plan between conspirators, or a forged lure to trap the innocent? Poirot convened the suspects in the vestry, where the air was thick with the scent of wax and mistrust. Eleanor sat rigidly, her morning dress a stark contrast to her pale face, her hands clutching a crumpled handkerchief. Victor Langford leaned against a bookcase, his blonde hair disheveled, his baritone voice silent, but his eyes blazing. Lydia Sinclair perched on a stool, her auburn curls framing a face taut with fear. Reverend Blackwood's rosary beads clicked incessantly, his clerical collar askew, while Dr. Edmund Crowe stood apart, his physician's calm a brittle mask. The room was a pressure cooker, ready to explode with accusation. And Blackwood was terrified of his secrets coming out. "Those ledgers prove it," Lydia interjected, her voice sharp. "I saw them arguing with Reginald that night, in the sacristy. They were furious. He was threatening them both." Crowe stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. "And the cyanide? It came from my clinic. Stolen, I swear, but they had access during visits. Check my records." His tone was defensive, and Poirot noted the sweat on his brow. A physician caught in a web of suspicion. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the clues. The fingerprint on the decanter, Langford's. The cufflink, Blackwood's. The forged letter, Lydia's. The vial in Eleanor's shed. The lavender-scented note, and now these footprints. Each was a note in a discordant symphony, but the melody of truth lay in their connections. He turned to the ledger found in Blackwood's study, its pages detailing siphoned church funds with Hawthorne's initials and Crowe's signatures. "Madam Hawthorne," he said, producing a bank record he'd obtained from Jap. "These transfers from your account to the Reverend. Charity or something more?" Eleanor's face drained of color. "Charity, Monsieur Poirot. I gave to the church, to help Thomas's sister. Reginald approved it, even if he was controlling." Her voice faltered, and Poirot noted the bruise on her wrist, a fading mark of her husband's temper. "Reverend," Poirot continued, "these funds, did they bind you to Madame Hawthorne in more than faith?" Blackwood's beads resumed their frantic clicking. "No. The money was for my sister's care, nothing more. Reginald knew, but he twisted it, demanded silence." His voice cracked, and Poirot sensed a deeper truth. A bond forged in desperation. To test their claims, Poirot visited the bank, where the clerk confirmed Eleanor's donations but noted their irregularity. Large sums, timed suspiciously close to Hawthorne's audits. A pattern emerged. Payments to Blackwood, followed by Hawthorne's threats of exposure. Blackmail him. His eyes met Poirot's, defiant but guarded. Langford, practicing in the nave, was defiant when questioned. "Monsieur Langford," Poirot said, "you accuse Eleanor and Blackwood, yet your fingerprint marks the decanter. A jealous rival, perhaps, seeking revenge?" Langford's jaw tightened. "I handled the decanter for communion, as I told you. Someone's framing me, probably them." His passion was raw, but Poirot noted his steady gaze, no flicker of guilt. As night fell, the fog thickened, muffling the village's sounds. Poirot returned to the church, drawn by the persistent whispers of ghosts. In the organ loft he examined the alcove again, its secrets yielding slowly. The lavender-stained cloth was silk, like Eleanor's shawl, but its weave matched a scarf Lydia owned. A deliberate plant or a careless error? The cyanide vial bore a scratch identical to those in Crowe's clinic. A new clue emerged. A locket, tucked in a crack, its silver surface engraved with "To E from T." Eternal silence. Eleanor and Thomas Blackwood, lovers, conspirators, or both? Poirot confronted them in the vicarage, holding the locket aloft. "Madame, Reverend, This suggests a bond beyond counsel. An affair, perhaps, that Hawthorne discovered? Eleanor's face crumpled, tears spilling. Years ago, before my marriage, Thomas and we loved. He chose the church and I married Reginald, but it was over. Her voice broke, and Poirot noted her anguish. Genuine or a performance? Blackwood's beads stilled. It was a youthful mistake. Reginald found out, used it to control us both. But murder? No. His voice was firm, but his eyes betrayed fear. Langford, overhearing from the hall, burst in. So that's it. They killed him to keep their secret. His accusation echoed, and Poirot felt the tension spike. Lydia, entering behind, added, I saw them whispering in the loft before the rehearsal. They looked guilty. Crow, the same jagged script. The truth lies in silence. The murderer was close, their masks slipping. But the final note was yet to sound. Chapter 8. The Inscribed Secret. The fog over Eldridge clung to the village like a whispered curse, its tendrils weaving through the ancient stones of St. Mary's Church, where the murder of Reginald Hawthorne cast a shadow darker than the night. Hercule Poirot stood in the vestry, the silver locket found in the organ loft's alcove gleaming in his gloved hand. Its inscription, to E from T, eternal silence, was a haunting note in the deadly symphony of clues. Victor Langford's fingerprint on the decanter, Reverend Blackwood's cufflink, Lydia Sinclair's forged letter, the cyanide vial in Eleanor Hawthorne's shed, the lavender-scented note. And now this locket linking Eleanor and Blackwood, the scrap of paper found in the churchyard scrawled with, "The truth lies in silence," echoed the locket's promise, suggesting a pact forged in secrecy. Poirot's little gray cells hummed, sensing the murderer's mask was fraying. Inspector Japp, his overcoat damp from the fog, paced beside Poirot, his voice rough with urgency. This locket nails it, Poirot. Eleanor and Blackwood, an affair, a motive, and that inscription? It's practically a confession. Poirot raised a manicured finger, his Belgian accent sharp. Non, mon ami. The locket sings of a secret, oui, but not necessarily of murder. Eternal silence, love, or a threat. We must probe deeper. His eyes gleamed as he surveyed the vestry where the suspects awaited, their faces a gallery of tension. Eleanor, rigid in her mourning dress, her hands trembling. Victor Langford, his blonde hair disheveled, his jaw tight. Lydia Sinclair, her auburn curls framing a pale, fearful face. Reverend Blackwood, his rosary beads clicking like a metronome of guilt. And Dr. Edmund Crowe, his physician's calm a brittle facade. Poirot held the locket aloft, his voice cutting through the silence. Mad him to bury their scandal. The footprints, the locket, it all fits. His baritone was sharp with accusation, and Poirot noted his eagerness to deflect suspicion from his own fingerprint. Lydia Sinclair, her voice trembling, added, I saw them whispering in the loft before the rehearsal. They looked conspiratorial, but I never thought they'd kill him. Her eyes darted to Eleanor, fear mingling with pity. Dr. Crowe stepped forward, his hands steady but his brow furrowed. If it's about secrets, check my clinic. The cyanide was stolen during Eleanor's visit last month, and Blackwood was there often for his sister's treatments. His tone was accusatory, and Poirot caught the flicker of calculation in his eyes, a physician deflecting his own exposure. Poirot's mind raced, weaving the clues. the poison in the sacramental wine, delivered during the hymn's crescendo, the forged note in Lydia's book, the tempered organ pipes, the ledger of embezzled funds, and now the locket, a symbol of a past that bound Eleanor and Blackwood. "Mes amis," he said, gathering them closer. "This crime is a duet of deception, but the melody is not yet clear. The locket suggests a motive, but the poison's timing during the sacred hymn requires intimate knowledge. A symbolic act, perhaps, to end a tormentor's reign." He turned to Eleanor, his tone gentle but piercing. "Madame, Reginald's cruelty, did it drive you to despair, to vengeance?" Eleanor's eyes glistened. "He was a monster behind closed doors, Monsieur Poirot. The war turned him cold, abusive. But I endured for the choir, for Eldridge. I couldn't kill him." Her bruise, fading but visible, spoke louder than her words, and Poirot filed it away, a motive rooted in pain. To Blackwood he said, "Reverend, the ledger shows Hawthorne's complicity in your embezzlement, yet he blackmailed you. Did you seek to silence him?" Blackwood's face paled. "He took a share, then turned on me. I feared exposure, yet where Blackwood's study yielded another clue. A hidden letter tucked in a Bible, from Eleanor to Blackwood, dated years ago. My heart is yours, but duty binds us apart." Sentimental, not incriminating. Yet it confirmed their past. Was it a motive for murder, or a red herring? Next, Poirot sought the chemist, who confirmed cyanide's rarity in Eldridge, save for Crow's clinic. A villager mentioned seeing Eleanor near the clinic late at night, but her alibi, home alone, couldn't be verified. Langford's alibi, practicing in the nave, held with Lydia's confirmation. But his bitterness toward Hawthorne was palpable. Lydia's fear of Eleanor suggested jealousy, not guilt. Crow's clinic records showed visits from both Eleanor and Blackwood, but no proof of theft. As night fell, the fog thickened, muffling the village's sounds. Poirot returned to St. Mary's, drawn by the persistent ghost whispers. In the organ loft he found a new clue. A smudged hymn sheet, its margins marked with musical notes that, when decoded, spelled betrayal. The script matched the ciphered note, suggesting a single hand orchestrating the clues. Was it a taunt or a mistake? Gathering the suspects in the vestry, Poirot held up the hymn sheet. "Mes amis, this word, betrayal, sings of motive. Hawthorne betrayed you all, Eleanor with cruelty, Blackwood with blackmail, Langford with theft, Lydia with false promises, Crow with exposure. But who turned betrayal into murder?" Their reactions were telling. Eleanor's hands trembled, Langford's jaw clenched. Lydia wept. Blackwood's beads resumed their frantic clicking, and Crow's face hardened. He pressed further, presenting the locket's inscription. "Eternal silence, a vow of love, or a pact to kill. Madame Hawthorne, Reverend, your bond fueled Hawthorne's blackmail. Did it also fuel his death? Eleanor's? Or another planned?" The murderer was close, their steps echoing in the fog, and the next revelation would either unmask them or deepen the darkness. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The fog over Eldridge hung like a shroud, its tendrils curling around St. Mary's Church, where the murder of Reginald Hawthorne cast a pall as heavy as the midnight bells. Hercule Poirot stood in the nave, beneath the stained glass saints whose colors bled into the shadows, his gray eyes sharp as he held the latest clue. A lavender-scented glove, monogrammed E.H., found in the churchyard after a villager's scream. The locket's inscription, to E from T, eternal silence, still echoed in his mind, binding Eleanor Hawthorne and Reverend Thomas Blackwood in a web of past love and present suspicion. The ciphered notes, the tampered organ pipes, Victor Langford's fingerprint, Lydia Sinclair's forged letter, Dr. Edmund Crow's cyanide, and the ledger of embezzled funds formed a discordant symphony. But the murderer's true note was yet to sound. Poirot's little gray cells buzzed, sensing the crescendo was near. Inspector Japp, his face flushed from the damp chill, joined Poirot, clutching the glove. "This seals it, Poirot. Eleanor's glove, her perfume, her motive. Abuse, blackmail, and now this affair with Blackwood. She's our killer." Poirot raised a manicured finger, his Belgian accent precise. "Non, mon ami. The glove is a loud note, too loud. A murderer so careful with poison would not drop such an obvious clue. We are being played, Japp, like a violin in a storm." His eyes gleamed as he surveyed the nave, where the choir members gathered, their faces pale under the flickering candlelight. Eleanor, rigid in her mourning dress, her hands trembling. Langford, his blonde hair disheveled, his jaw tight. Lydia, her auburn curls framing a fearful face. Blackwood, his rosary beads clicking like a metronome, and Crow, his physician's calm a brittle mask. Poirot stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "Mes amis, the murderer is among us. The clues, the note, Hawthorne's perfume, yet she denies it. A frame, or carelessness?" Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "I swear, Monsieur Poirot, that glove isn't mine. Someone stole it, used my scent to trap me." Her eyes glistened, and Poirot noted her desperation. Genuine, or a performance? He turned to Crow. "Doctor, your scandal. A botched surgery Hawthorne exploited. Did you poison him to end his threats?" Crow's hands steadied, his voice cold. "He blackmailed me, yes, but I didn't kill. My cyanide was stolen. Check my locks, tampered with." His eyes met Poirot's, defiant but guarded. To Lydia, Poirot said, "Mademoiselle, spurned by Hawthorne's favor, yet your alibi holds. Were you jealous enough to act?" Lydia's voice trembled. "I envied his attention to others, but I didn't harm him. I was in the nave singing." Her fear seemed real, and Poirot filed it away, a soprano caught in a deadly score. Langford, his baritone rough, interjected, "What about Blackwood? Those ledgers show he stole and Hawthorne knew. He had every reason to kill." Blackwood's beads resumed their clicking. "I sinned, yes, borrowing from my sister's care. Hawthorne took a share, then threatened exposure. But I'm no murderer." His voice cracked, and Poirot sensed a man tracked by shame. Poirot's gaze swept to Eleanor. "Madame, your husband's cruelty, his blackmail over your past with Blackwood, did it drive you to vengeance?" Eleanor's hands trembled. "He was a monster, but I endured for Eldridge. I couldn't kill." Her bruise, fading but visible, spoke louder than her words. Poirot's mind raced, weaving the clues. The poison in the sacramental wine timed for the hymn's crescendo. The forged notes, the tampered pipes, the locket's secret, the glove's monogram. A new clue had emerged from the churchyard search, a hidden will tucked in the crypt, altering Hawthorne's estate to disinherit Eleanor unless Blackwood officiated his funeral. "A motive for collusion," Poirot murmured. "But is it the final note?" He gathered the suspects closer, his voice rising. Looked guilty, but I didn't think. Murder, Crow added. The cyanide came from my clinic, but I didn't give it. Eleanor and Blackwood had access. His tone was accusatory, and Poirot caught the calculation in his eyes. To test their alibis, Poirot revisited the church's sacristy, where the decanter stood, its smudge still visible. A closer inspection revealed a faint scratch on its base, matching the vial in the alcove, a mark of haste, perhaps. He questioned villagers who confirmed Eleanor's late-night visits to the vicarage, Blackwood's secretive meetings with her, and Crow's nervous demeanor after Hawthorne's death. A seamstress mentioned seeing Langford near the churchyard, carrying a bundle, another red herring, or a genuine clue. Poirot's investigation deepened as he examined the will. Its recent date suggested Hawthorne's paranoia, his need to control even after death. The clause binding Blackwood to the funeral was a leash, ensuring compliance, or a motive for murder. He confronted Blackwood in the vicarage, holding the will. "Reverend, this document ties you to Eleanor's inheritance. Did you conspire to secure it?" Blackwood's face crumpled. "He forced me to agree, to keep my embezzlement quiet. But I didn't kill." His voice broke, and Poirot sensed truth mingled with desperation. Eleanor, questioned next, wept. "Reginald controlled everything, even my future. I didn't know about the will until after his death." Her anguish seemed real, but Poirot's gray cells questioned her sincerity. Langford in the nave was defiant. "I'm no killer, Poirot. My fingerprint was planted and I never wrote that letter about Lydia." His passion was raw, but his alibi held. Lydia, practicing in the choir loft, admitted, "I was jealous of Reginald's favor, but I didn't act. My hymn book was tampered with. Someone wanted me blamed." Her fear rang true. Crow, at his clinic, insisted, "The cyanide was stolen. I'm a victim, not a murderer." His calm was cracking, and Poirot noted his guarded eyes. As night fell, the fog thickened, muffling the village's sound. Fleeing the church, clutching a small book. Poirot rushed to the crypt, his flashlight revealing a hidden hymn book, its pages marked with a final note. "Justice sings in silence." The script matched the cipher, and the truth was close, but the murderer's final mask was yet to fall. Chapter 10. The Final Chord. The fog over Eldridge clung to St. Mary's Church like a mourner's veil, its tendrils weaving through the ancient stones as the midnight bells tolled with solemn finality. Hercule Poirot stood in the nave, the stained glass saints casting fractured colors across his immaculate suit, his gray eyes alight with the clarity of revelation. The hymn book found in the crypt, its pages marked with "Justice sings in silence," was the final note in a symphony of clues. Victor Langford's fingerprint, Reverend Blackwood's cufflink, Lydia Sinclair's forged letter, Eleanor Hawthorne's lavender-scented glove, Dr. Crow's cyanide, the locket's inscription, and the ledger of embezzled funds. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deception, but Poirot's little gray cells had woven them into a coherent score. The murderer's mask was about to fall. Inspector Japp, his face etched with anticipation, stood beside Poirot, clutching the hymn book. "This is it, Poirot. That note, 'Justice sings in silence.' It's a confession, isn't it? Eleanor and Blackwood, tied by that locket, the glove, the footprints. They did it." Poirot raised a manicured finger, his Belgian accent sharp. "Patience, mon ami. The clues sing a duet, oui, but the melody is more complex. We gather all, and the truth will resonate." He had summoned the suspects to the nave, where the air was thick with incense and tension. Eleanor Hawthorne sat in a pew, her mourning dress stark against her pale face, her hands trembling. Victor Langford leaned against a pillar, his blonde hair disheveled, his eyes wary. Lydia Sinclair perched on a bench, her auburn curls framing a fearful face. Reverend Blackwood's rosary bead ruled the choir with an iron baton, stealing compositions from Monsieur Langford, favoring Mademoiselle Sinclair, blackmailing Dr. Crow over a past scandal, and extorting Reverend Blackwood over embezzled funds. But his cruelest notes were struck against Madame Hawthorne. Abuse hidden behind closed doors. A marriage of torment. Eleanor's tears spilled, but Poirot continued. The poison, cyanide in the sacramental wine, was delivered during the hymn's crescendo, a moment of divine distraction. Only someone intimate with Hawthorne's ritual sip could strike so precisely. The clues pointed to many. Monsieur Langford's fingerprint, a red herring planted to deflect his rivalry. Mademoiselle Sinclair's forged letter, crafted by Langford to shift blame. The ghostly whispers, orchestrated by a paid boy, scented with Madame Hawthorne's lavender to frame her. He held up the locket. This, inscribed to E from T, eternal silence, revealed a past love between Madame Hawthorne and Reverend Blackwood, ended years ago, but discovered by Hawthorne. He used it to blackmail them both, demanding silence and compliance. The ledger showed Blackwood's embezzlement with Hawthorne's complicity, a shared sin that bound them. The will altered to disinherit Eleanor unless Blackwood officiated the funeral, was a final leash. Poirot turned to Eleanor, his voice gentle but firm. Madam, your bruise, your fear, it spoke of a life endured, not lived. You sought freedom, oui? And the Reverend, trapped by his own sins, sought salvation. Together, you composed a deadly duet. Eleanor's voice broke. He was a monster, Monsieur Poirot. He beat me, controlled me, mocked my pain. When he learned of Thomas and me, he made our lives hell, demanding money, loyalty, silence. Her tears flowed freely, and Poirot noted the raw anguish, a confession taking. Poirot continued, his voice rising. The note, your time ends with the final note, was Madame Hawthorne's, disguised in a jagged script to mimic Langford. The cipher in Mademoiselle Sinclair's book, the lavender-scented glove, the tampered pipes, all were Eleanor's distractions, sowing fear and confusion. The locket, left in the alcove, was a mistake, a relic of your past with Blackwood, meant to be hidden, but found. Eleanor sobbed, her composure shattering. I couldn't take it anymore. He deserved it, the beatings, the threats, the blackmail. Thomas didn't know I'd poisoned the wine, but he suspected. He let it happen. Her confession hung in the air, a final, discordant note. Blackwood's face crumpled. I couldn't stop her. I prepared the wine, yes, but I prayed she wouldn't act. When she did, I stayed silent, for her, for my sister, for my shame. His voice was a whisper, a man broken by complicity. Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. The logic is clear. Eleanor, driven by years of abuse and the promise of inheritance, stole the cyanide and spiked the wine. Reverend Blackwood, bound by love and fear, prepared the chalice, knowing her intent but unable to act. The hymn's poison was symbolic, an end to their sacred torment. Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs gleaming. Brilliant, Poirot. You've done it again. He moved toward Eleanor and Blackwood, who stood frozen, their faces etched with defeat. Eleanor's voice was a whisper. I wanted freedom, not blood. But he left me no choice. Blackwood remained silent, his bead still, his eyes downcast. As Japp led them away, the choir members dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous church. Langford's shoulders sagged, relieved but bitter. Lydia wept, her innocence restored but her trust shattered. Crow's face was unreadable, his secret safe but his conscience heavy. The village